Every day, businesses across the world make decisions on who to purchase goods and services from. What if those companies use their purchasing power to advance gender equality through gender-responsive procurement? Gender-responsive procurement, or GRP, means sourcing from women-owned businesses as well as from gender-responsive businesses. And not just in the name of increased gender equality, but in the name of good business too. UN Women's report, Procurement Strategic Value, Why Gender-Responsive Procurement Makes Business Sense, shows revenues increase as procurement spend is lowered. Brand reputation can be enhanced at the same time as increasing innovation and adaptability, lowering risk, and improving service delivery. Finally, GRP can advance economic development and inclusive growth for all. Sustainable Development Goal 5 calls for all stakeholders, including business, to work collectively to remove barriers to women's empowerment and achieve gender equality by 2030. So, if you're in charge of procurement, you could ask these simple questions. Are my suppliers committed to gender equality? Have they signed the Women's Empowerment Principles founded by the UN Global Compact and UN Women? Do they have policies and practices in place to address sexual harassment and gender-based violence? Do women workers face pregnancy and/or maternity discrimination? Is there a gender pay gap? And are the specific health and safety concerns of women workers addressed? To learn more about adopting gender-responsive procurement practices, visit unglobalcompact.org/gender.
After watching this video, we are happy to open the interactive discussion with our panelists and hear their expert insights from their own experiences. Applying GRP in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion allow companies to support diverse people. For example, not only using a gender lens in procurement policies and practices, but also considering and taking positive action to rectify the various kinds of overlapping discrimination and disadvantage that people face on the ground of gender. What I want to ask my panel to reflect on, based on the Women Empowerment Principles set of offering guidance to business on how to promote gender equality, women's empowerment in the workplace, market, and community. I would want the panel to request on the Women's Empowerment Principle number 5 on implementing supply chain and market practices that empower women, enables companies to influence business partners through inclusive supply chain policies and standard of engagement. How has your company interpreted this principle into its procurement practices? I'll start with you, Beth. Thank you so much.
So thank you for the opportunity to join this discussion alongside other global leaders. And indeed, our bank has been able to approach this particular issue from two perspectives. The first perspective is a program perspective, and the second perspective is from a policy perspective. So we became UN signatories, and with that, certain responsibilities came with it, responsibilities that we take very seriously. Now, when I talk about a market perspective, I'd like to say that the bank has a very active women markets program that seeks to educate, to empower, and protect the overall financial status of the woman. Now, this particular Women Markets program gave rise to the need to review some of our internal policies. And this really was a starting point. Now, let me just say that the Women Markets value proposition is driven through bank-led initiatives and collaborative efforts alongside key value chain partners, such as yourselves. We have market access partners such as SheTrades. We have AWEP as one of our partners on the market access side to help women access AGOA opportunities. We have financial access partners and knowledge partners such as Tactive Consulting. So the program indeed influenced certain policy reforms, first of which was the review of the procurement policy. So as an organization, we discussed ways to drive gender responsive procurement that supports both equal market opportunities, and not just opportunities, but equal outcomes for women in business. The operative word here, as I mentioned, being tangible outcomes and not just opportunities. So this objective supports our empowerment aspirations for our women markets and is completely aligned with the vision of the women markets agenda. So just going into what SBM has been doing, I'll start off with year 2019. What we did is that we opened a pre-qualification window for women-owned businesses, our customers, and also suppliers of a certain organization that we have a relationship with. This is Safaricom, the largest telco in Kenya. And through this process, 250 women-owned businesses were successfully pre-qualified. In 2020, we were able to train 150 women-owned businesses, and we trained them on COVID-19 crisis management, and we were able to share certain toolkits that they will be able to utilize. Out of this, 22 women-owned businesses were awarded procurement contracts. In 2021, we also continued with the supplier diversity and inclusion programs. A training series was launched to create awareness and the business case for supporting women. In the same year, our internal EXCO was able to approve and embed in policy the fact that 10% of procurement spend would go to women-owned businesses. Now, 2022, fifth month in, we have over 40 total women entrepreneurs who have been awarded bank procurement contracts. Now, the procurement spend that we are looking at in the next 3 years is about 3 billion Kenya shillings. And indeed, these women will be able to participate in these procurement opportunities that will be forthcoming. So the bank has a growing pool of competent women suppliers who have been providing services to the bank since the year 2019. A couple of other things that we're able to do internally is to be able to measure the procurement outcomes judiciously to ensure that we are actually meaningfully supporting women in business. So we are able to track how many of the suppliers are actually women enterprises. It has not been easy, but we have been doing it nonetheless. In addition, we are about to launch a further procurement opportunity series beginning in September, because we renew our procurement suppliers list every 3 years. And so what we have done, we have started to share the opportunities with our own customers, with other like-minded organizations that are aggregators of women in business. And finally, we have a list from AGPOA that focuses on women and those who are differently enabled to be able to participate in this particular exercise. Finally, something that is work in progress is that we are working very closely with SheTrades in the Commonwealth to build internal capacity, because we feel that that is where we have an Achilles heel, to be able to get all stakeholders to buy into the gender responsive procurement processes. And so what we've done, we are going through an exercise that will take about 6 months to be able to execute a supplier diversity sensitization and training for the leadership and procurement teams at SBM Bank. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth, for that really exciting work that you have done. And you've clearly highlighted to us the impact, but we will come to that very exciting work indeed. I'll now hand over to Obina to take us through what Unilever has done.
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. What we find, and it's a fact now, is that when you invest in women-owned businesses, these businesses and the owners of their businesses tend to invest more in their communities than, say, male-owned businesses. I believe the statistics is about 90% versus 35% for male-owned businesses. And what this is leading, it's leading more and more corporates to now adopt a supplier diversity strategy. And as part of that strategy, corporates are making external commitments to include more and more of these underrepresented groups into their supply chain. As an example, for Unilever, under our social pillar, which is about contributing to a fairer, more socially inclusive world, Unilever has committed to spend 2 billion euros yearly with diverse businesses by 2025 globally. Corporations like ours are also launching these supplier development programs to build the capacities of these diverse businesses. In realization that they mostly fall under the SME space. The goal of this program is to help them obtain, improve, and retain the skills, knowledge, tools, equipment, and financing needed to fulfill corporate requirements. It's not about paying lip service to this. We want women-owned suppliers, but we also want women-owned suppliers who are delivering quality and adding value, because that's the only way to make this sustainable. Also at Unilever, we are also requesting our strategic partners to join us on this journey by encouraging them to develop their own supplier diversity programs. So whether they are in non-traditional, so for example, raw material suppliers, logistics, so what I would define as non-traditional sectors. And we believe by doing this, it allows us to magnify the social impact to our communities and societies. So one of the things we did, first of all, was that we did a benchmark in Unilever to actually understand what percentage of our suppliers fall under this category of women-owned, or in order to balance gender. And when we did this, we realized that this required us to fast track this process, because we found out that in certain categories like indirects, which would be things like marketing, business services, catering services, etc., we found most of our vendors, our female-owned businesses, involved in those areas. So partially what we then realized is that because this didn't constitute a huge portion of our spend, in order to expand this, what we had to do was to bring in these, encourage these women to invest and look into areas such as, that are not typical, areas such as the logistics, such as raw material, packaging material supplies. So we encourage them by providing them funding, training, etc., just to ensure that they have a bigger opportunity. So really exciting times in this space, and we look forward to doing much more. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shobina. I do really like what you've said about ensuring that this just not becomes just a lip service, but you've translated that into various actions we will come back to. Last but not least, Khalila, do you want to take us through?
Thanks, Ayanda. Hello, everybody. As introduced, my name is Khalila Mbowe, and I lead a group of social enterprises here in Tanzania, Unleashed Africa Social Ventures. Now, our startups or our social enterprises largely work in the area of youth development, social innovation, and job creation. And whatever we do in the creative economy, we work tackling gender issues, developing tech products that tackle gender issues. And we also work in the social enterprise ecosystem development space. We find that across the board, we're using a lot of tech services. We're in the tech space quite a bit. So in answering this question, I want to tackle it from two areas. So as a female-owned business, Unleashed Africa Social Ventures, I found that it was very easy for me at the very beginning to easily employ. At a point, I realized my team was fully run by women. We had a full team of, at a point, we're 13 women, and it was very hard for me to actually notice that there was some sort of, people kept asking, there must be a bias within your company. But I ended up noticing that the team of employees were fully female, but when it came to the service providers, it was fully male. And it took a while for me to notice that. And when it came to our team of service providers, you'd find that most of them had these technical skills in the media space and in IT product development, in app development, and so forth. And you find that those were largely men. And I remember noticing this in 2019 and trying really hard to find, female-owned businesses that could give me the same quality of service that I was looking for. And as intentional as I was, unfortunately, I just could not find a company that I could connect with. And this was a little bit of a conundrum because, back then it was even before we signed the web or even went through it, but it was something important to note that, on that spectrum, Obina, you speak about skills. There was a massive issue and a massive mismatch between what I desired my company to stand for and what was available in the market. So when we're talking about skills, we're talking about, Obina, you're talking about logistics, packaging, and supplies. Realized that there was a massive mismatch within the tech space when it came to digital skills and really, in that, when we're talking about 4IR, fourth industrial revolution, there was a space when we're looking at AI and machine learning and so forth. There was a massive gap. And, so one of the things that we did very intentionally was, start developing programs that were largely focused on bringing up skills of women-owned businesses. So one of the social ventures or social enterprises that we own is called The Space, and we deal with, social enterprise ecosystem development. So we run accelerator programs for social enterprises. We run media initiatives on social entrepreneurship and so forth. So we came up with a program called Uwezo. Uwezo is a program that's running on its second year, and it largely focuses on helping female entrepreneurs build business models that they could sustain, that they could be able to grow brands that could give quality services that were at that point not available within the market. And it was really important for us, even though we are a startup, we are an SME ourselves, it was very important to have that trickle down effect. Because yes, on one note, we are tendering for business for work from big business, but at the same time, as we stand as a startup, we do know that we're also procuring services. So how do we make sure that across the value chain, we are trickling down this desire to make sure that we have gender responsive procurement? So yes, we can find them, but how do we make sure that we bring them up so that they're providing us the service that will enable us to provide this person the service that they require? And so that's part of what we've done. I'll speak a little bit more to how we've positioned ourselves to make sure that we're effective in that space later on. But we realized that we have been really impactful, a lot more impactful in doing that. And if I speak to our program that is Uwezo, one of the things that we've managed to do is develop a very, I would personally call it a best practice. We'll release a report July this year, a best practice on how to really build up skills for women-owned businesses. Not just have them in a training room where you are teaching business model, but how do you make sure that you have on-the-ground support that really allows their businesses to grow so that they can now transfer what they're learning in the training space with mentorship on ground, because that's also another gap that we're finding. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Hala, for that. I think the focus of your work is really critical because often we underestimate the importance of investing in the real and the right skills to ensure that women are able to participate. I will come back to that. I'm going to go back to Beth and ask her this question again. from the report again and the best practices that you've shared with us today from your own experience. If someone would be interested on how you've started this, can you share like what are the steps? Where did you start? You've shared a lot about the impact of this approach, but if anyone is interested to follow your very good steps, what advice would you give them? What steps did you take to get to where you are right today?
Okay, so the most important step is to get stakeholder buy-in, to be able to educate the organization and the entire enterprise the benefits of ensuring that you are gender responsive in the way you approach work, the way you approach your customers and various stakeholders. So education is the most important. And indeed, to be able to get that policy approved, I had to be able to put a strong business case to show why it is important as an organization that we need to have gender responsive, for instance, procurement principles. So it begins at the top. So the minute the top is bought in, then now you go to the next level of leadership to be able to share the same, so that then when you're coming to them and saying that we need to be able to set aside certain opportunities for women-owned businesses, the why is clear. So it really begins with the why. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Beth. And now, I mean, we've talked a lot about the need to address structural barriers faced by women businesses, because this requires sustained engagement, skills development in itself, and women entrepreneurs must be enabled to benefit from focused skills. I want to ask you, Khalila, most companies we come across in our work on gender responsive procurement often say to us that we can't find women-owned enterprises. And the question I want to ask you, how can female-owned or women-owned companies position themselves to be more visible, seen, and discovered by companies?
That's an excellent question. Yes, several reports have come up, and one of the major barriers to gender responsive procurement is the fact that we can't find women-owned businesses, and women-owned businesses are nowhere to be seen. Then how do you know that this is a woman-owned business? And I think, Beth, you also spoke to, is it Beth or Obina? I don't remember, but that you had to, Obina, sorry, Unilever, you had to figure out who the women-owned, which ones the women-owned businesses were. There's a little bit of a challenge there. The challenge that I find personally, and as well as with the businesses that we work with, when it comes to female founders, there's this issue with female founders really putting themselves out there. There are, of course, sociological barriers that actually restrict women from putting themselves out there, but they're there. And, they go into very mental issues such as, the confidence to stand up and say, well, I own so-and-so company and I'm doing 1, 2, 3, and be able to personally brand yourself so that you are seen and have a voice in that space. We find that more men across different sectors have, used their voices to speak on issues in various sectors more than women do. So it's very easy when we, try to pinpoint any sector really on the continent. It's easier to come up with a male-owned business rather than a female-owned business, unless it's an NGO working on, child care and, gender issues. So there's that issue where, one of the things that female founders must do is, develop a voice within your sector. It's very important to personally brand yourself, not only as a founder of an organization, but somebody who has a voice that can speak to the actual matter that you're tackling. So if it's, if it's service delivery, find a way to speak to service delivery and use the different platforms online. Right now, we're in a space that, digital gives us an incredible opportunity to leverage reach and exposure. find a voice and use your voice. Two, make sure that our companies are seen. Most of the times when you go on a website, for instance, that is for a male-run business, and you have a team there, you will see the male CEO in suit and tie, looking strapped, with a picture there on why and how they started the organization. But when it comes to female-run businesses, you find that female founders are very much in the background, especially when they are led by young women. Because over here, that there are two issues. There's women-led businesses and women-led businesses when that young women-led businesses. When it comes to young women, the barrier is even higher, right? And that's something that we need to note. I myself, when I was starting out, I was told by a very, very kind gentleman that I wouldn't make it because I was young and I was a woman and I was African. So those three things worked against me when it came to going for work. So making sure that our companies are seen, using different resources available online, so such as search engine optimization. You find that our male counterparts are very quick to actually really promote their businesses across the platform. Now for us, you find that a lot of women depend on word of mouth. We spend a lot of word of mouth marketing, and like, that's great, but to a certain point, we need to be able to push ourselves out there. Three, it's really important to look at, there's a platform called We Connect that has actually done work with United Nations Global Compact at a point, and I wonder if you and women have worked with them as well. I think we need a platform like We Connect on the continent. One of the things that they do is basically they connect women-run businesses with, they expose women-run businesses so that they can be able to grow and have, reach within the global marketplace. And having a space like We Connect allows buyers globally to be able to track and find women-owned businesses. They not only endorse, but they find them, they validate, and so forth. And it's a great space to make sure that we're found. So, we need to make sure that we're on these platforms, not just locally and having your local Kikoba and your local endorsers, but internationally making sure that our businesses are on those levels. I also have to speak to, so we've talked about skills a lot. There's this thing that happens a lot when I talk to fellow female founders, especially those who run newly founded businesses. There's this sense of entitlement. Now that we have this, this wave of female empowerment, empowering female-owned businesses, there's a sense of entitlement that because I run a female-owned business, I should just get. But I'm like, no, you shouldn't. You shouldn't. We really need to be pushing for quality. We're not entitled to anything. If we're not delivering, then it is hard to keep pushing for this agenda. So on the flip side, the female-owned businesses themselves need to make sure that we are pushing this agenda by making sure that we're providing the quality that we need to be providing. It's not, the skills is one thing, but two, we need to be taking up this agenda to heart and making sure that we're creating snowballing, such that when we're providing great service, when to the business case that Beth was speaking about, when we're providing great service, when we're now meeting the business case itself, then one of the things that we're telling people is, yes, we're validating this, we're validating the entire concept. And lastly, there's an issue with safe procurement. I do know we're not necessarily talking about it in this space, but one of the things that I do know really pushes women from going for big business is the perception that I'm not going to get it anyway. Right? And then there's also that space where it's not safe to go for big business, because if I go for big business, the barriers to entry are not just on skills, on the exposure and the position of my company, it's also on me as a woman founder. I'm in trouble when I go into that room. I have faced it time and time again, where a lot of companies do say that they focus on women empowerment, but when you're in that room, you face such questions and such harassment that make you wonder, why did I come for this in the first place? So that, what I know in our space, that largely keeps us away. And in terms of positioning for female-owned businesses or females running businesses, it's important that when we're approaching companies, we're not only and we find such limitations, it's important for us to be able to go back to a company and find, I want to say, an advocate from within. Because that's something our male counterparts do. We should be able to find an advocate for within that truly stands on women empowerment and doesn't just pay lip service to the entire movement. So there are a few things that we must do, but it is important to be aggressive. It is important to be bold. So yes, keep the compassion that comes with femininity, but we must be bold and really push for the agenda for us to really stand out.
Thank you, Khalila, for that. I really do like the fact that you've emphasized the point about women-owned businesses not being a homogeneous group. Because often when we talk about women-owned businesses, we think about it's all the women businesses, but there are categories, and there are also categories of disadvantage when it comes to accessing these business opportunities. I want to ask Obina, given what you said, Khalila, and what Obina shared with us about the supplier development work that they are doing, what additional work are they doing as a company to ensure that women-owned businesses have fair access to bid for large contracts?
Thank you very much, and I'll just come back to that. Look, we're doing a couple of things, and I'll take us through them. I think one of the first things I had mentioned earlier is we're ring fencing. So we've ring fenced a part of our spend deliberately for women. So, and we publicized that, we've put that out there. So I told you it was 2 billion euros globally for Unilever. And this breaks down into the smaller entities. So, for example, in Nigeria, we've put down a value of 7.2 million euros to be spent year in, year out on female-owned businesses. But as you can imagine, once you say that, the question then becomes: who are these women? Where are we going to? Who are these women-owned businesses that we're going to spend our money on? And I think Khalila mentioned very clearly. An organization like We Connect. What we want to do is we want to expand business relationships with women entrepreneurs, including small businesses. And what we will do is we will partner by partnering with organizations that will help us with to network with these women-owned businesses. So identify them, identify women-owned businesses with track records of working with organizations, etc., and that allows us at least to understand what the landscape is. We also look at once you've done this, then there's an element of training, because we have our processes. So organizations like ours, we have our procurement process, which includes things like how you tender, how you supply, even how you get payment. So what we do is we've also partnered with other organizations to provide training for these identified women-owned businesses. And when we say women-owned, women-controlled, we also mean a business that is at least 51% owned and controlled by women. That's how we define it. So we have very, very clear definitions, and in partnership with the likes of all these organizations, women network organizations, it allows us to do that. Then, once you've done this, and you've given, so you've identified, you've ring-fenced, you've identified, you've given them the training. One of the issues, because these are mainly SMEs, is around financing. So we also support gender-inclusive credit and financing solutions, where you're giving preferential supply financing programs to women-owned businesses. So at least you solve the problem of them being able to fulfill the obligations and get paid. Another area is what I would call mentorship, networking, role modeling. One of the big areas, one of the things that we're most proud of in Unilever is we have very strong women entrepreneurs who we have together co-financed and work together to develop innovative solutions for Unilever. So by doing this, one of the things we want to do is put these organizations as role models to other women entrepreneurs so that they can see someone else is doing this and it's something that is doable. Once you do that bit, you also have to look at, I think Kalila mentioned something similar about role modeling and having an advocate. It's great to have an advocate that's male, like an Obina in Unilever for you, but I think what's even better is when women organizations see within procurement teams strong women advocates, so women managers who they are interacting with on a day-to-day basis, who are advocating for them. So I think that's another area that we like to look at. We've also got several partnerships with the likes of the IFC, World Bank, where you bring together corporate buyers to make specific, measurable, and time-bound commitments to increase access to corporate procurement opportunities for women-owned small and medium enterprises. So I think in summary, it's about making sure that you have the funds available, so ring-fencing the funds, access to training and capital, and then role modeling and advocacy within and outside the organization. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you for sharing such valuable insights with our audience. That's all we have time for today. But before closing off the session, I would like to ask you if you can just provide any closing reflections you may have on the topic at hand today. Very, very valuable insights and steps and ideas. I'm sure people can just, from listening from all of you, be able to translate that into their own company practices and policies. Thank you very much. Any last reflections from each one of you?
Yes, I could start.
Please go ahead.
So, whilst reflecting as to why organizations should adopt gender-responsive procurement practices, it is worthwhile just mentioning what the journey has been like, especially from the perspective of the pros and the cons, the challenges and the benefits. And indeed, initially quantifying the benefits of working with women suppliers is not easy. And the reason for this is that to disaggregate data to provide meaningful insights initially is an uphill task, but a worthwhile task. Now, I have observed that organizations that are intentional around women economic empowerment gain positive reputation of benefits that attract customer loyalty and grow brand equity. And so I read somewhere that when a company's sustainability efforts and ethics become the cornerstone of its buying decisions, its reputation is equally enhanced. Now, I am pleased to mention and share with you that just today we have been announced as the best bank in diversity and inclusion in Kenya by the World Economic Magazine. And year in, year out, this recognition has come through. Just last year, we were awarded the best bank in women banking in Kenya, but again, by the World Economic Magazine, just honoring the efficacy of our marketplace initiatives. Now, a couple of other reflections is that we do measure the targets around supplier diversity, and we measure it from the perspective of the number of women-led businesses that are onboarded. We measure the loans extended to women. These are real insights that really build the strong case that I was talking about earlier. We measure the number of women who were able to connect to markets and the number of businesses that are able to get procurement opportunities and outcomes. And so it's just to encourage organizations that are looking to go the route of, just enhancing the gender responsive procurement processes, that there's real benefit out of it. The other thing is that gender responsive procurement sometimes is interpreted as a form of positive discrimination, since it privileges certain categories of business over the other. So this can be perceived to go against the principles of merit and fair competition, which are really foundational of the field of procurement. And I'm privileged to sit in the procurement committees. And so some reflections here is that you can be able to mitigate this by educating the need to see the social responsibility and social outcomes as part of the organizational mission. And so indeed, the big work, the huge and uphill task of leaders is really to just make sure that the leadership understands the positive associations of driving GRP. Affirmative action sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, actually can be contested. A couple of other reflections is that procurement decisions in procurement are generally driven by considerations of value for money, economy, and efficacy. And indeed, women enterprises tend to be smaller, making them miss out on opportunities due to lack of scale, which is really the elephant in the room, the lack of scale to be able to meaningfully participate in tenders and large-sized tenders. So we observe that across Africa, women-led businesses are a growing share of enterprises, yet only 1% win. Yet women only win an estimated 1% of the procurement spend of large corporations, which is the case in our organization as well. And so we observe the significant structural barriers. We observe other challenges in terms of ability to be able to participate in this, supplier opportunities. And my clarion call is that there's need to enlist organizations to offer enterprise and supplier development programs that can help women enterprises compete at the necessary levels and help organizations to foster gender responsive practices. So I'll stop there and say thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you so much, Beth. Obina, any last reflections?
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's very clear, the points are clear. If in the African continent, if we are to surmount our various economic challenges, we do need to empower women, and empower women-owned businesses is an important part of doing that. We do understand that it's not an easy journey. I think we all have to make targets. We all have to put targets on the table so that at least we're working to something. And I think once we do that, we provide the training, we provide the assistance in terms of capital, and we ring fence some of this spend that we want to do. So we are very deliberate about it. Once we do all of this, I think we will have we will arrive at the intended journey. I think just to end this, personally in Nigeria, I have a roadmap or a plan where today I would like to see within the next 3, 4, 5 years, a woman-owned business or supplier being the largest supplier to Unilever in Nigeria. And it's those sorts of deliberate outcomes because it has a role model and a domino effect on the rest of the society. Because once one woman organization-led business does this, it opens the door for others. So I think I will end on that point and hope in a couple of years, whoever is sitting here will be able to say, yes, this was done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Obina. Khalila, your last take?
Yes, so when we're talking about gender responsive procurement, when we're talking about really building the capacity of women entrepreneurs to compete, we find that this is a conversation that largely focuses or is driven by large corporations. When we're talking about the web tools, it's largely driven by large corporations. But in the African context, where I sit, we find that, yes, we're talking about, the youth and the bulging stats of youth unemployment is shocking. But on the flip side, we're encouraging entrepreneurship and innovation on the continent. And what that does is that's propelling the number of startups that are coming up. Now, with the number of startups that are coming up, one of the things that we find is they are being bombarded with a lot of innovation and, business development training and so forth. But this conversation about gender responsive procurement, the web tools, this entire conversation is not being had in those rooms. But we have young people who are building the next big businesses for the African continent. And if we are not having these conversations in those rooms as well, what we are creating is the same problem that's going to replicate itself in years to come. And so I think my call is to make sure that as we're having these conversations, we make sure that we bring in these startups and smaller companies into these spaces so that they are now also starting the web, that they're also engaging in this conversation, that it's not a big business conversation. It must trickle down for this to be sustainable for our continent. Because I do believe in the next 10 years, hopefully, and if we really have anything to do about it, people like me, some of the biggest brands are going to be brands that were built by young people like me. We are going to be building the businesses that truly revolutionize how we do business on the continent. But if we're not in these spaces where we're having these conversations and we're only looking up to the larger corporations to really spearhead these conversations, we're not doing our continent a service. So, so I think that's my call to people listening. And also, I truly believe that that's the way that we fast pace. You truly, really first face this whole entire women into entrepreneurship, empowerment movement as a whole. Bring startups into conversation. Make sure that they're not part and parcel of implementing the agenda. And that's it from me.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening. You have heard them. Beth has told us that supplier development that really equips women to be able to access large contracts is required. We had Obina mentioning to us, and we will be watching him, that he's developed his own roadmap, and 3 to 5 years, we're going to see Unilever in Nigeria, one of the biggest, largest supplier will be a women-owned entity, will be tracking that story. And Khalila also highlighting to us the importance of bringing these startups closer to this conversation, as they potentially will be big business tomorrow and they need to be part of this conversation when they're starting off. Thank you everyone for your contribution and your participation. We really had important insights from our panel, and they really confirmed the positive impact this gender responsive procurement can make in terms of strengthening business opportunities for women-owned enterprises, but also for the company themselves, the company itself. And I just want to close by highlighting one of my very favorite quotes from Professor Bonang Mohale, who's a business leader in South Africa and Africa as a whole. And he always reminds us that business does not need permission from government, from anyone to close the gender gap. It needs to be a political will. And all the stories that you have shared today with us have attested to this political will, which translate into things being done and achieved. Thank you very much, everyone. Good afternoon.